I am not saying this is the end-all be-all solution, okay? What I'm simply saying is that given the unfortunate circumstances of public transportation, I think this solution makes the most sense for most of the world. Unless it's densely populated, which most cities, in the US at least from what I know, are spread out. I think this is the closest idea we've ever had to eventually make traffic less congested. Hell, even Elon has said he isn't against the idea of mass transit. If anything, he actually welcomes it and even wants to try every solution possible. And please keep in mind, I am no infrastructure expert. I'm just an idiot on the internet with opinions that may or may not be right or wrong like everyone else on this platform. I am in no way trying to quote-unquote debunk the efforts of the content creators who disagree with me on this topic. If there's anything you feel I've missed in this video, please let me know. I welcome constructive criticism. It gradually helps me bring you guys more polished and refined content. Oh, and one last thing. Please, 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 please keep in mind that this company is still in its infancy. It took an entire century, hell, I'd even argue longer, to get our infrastructure to today. To say that it wasn't easy would be a gross understatement. It therefore stands to reason that the Boring Company should be looked at no differently. Why else do you think the event announcing the Boring Company was only under a half hour long? These things take time. So spare me the BS that their first tunnel in LA is the example of the best they can do. Given that it's just their demo, it's actually an example of the worst case scenario, meaning it only gets better from there on out. Rome wasn't built in a day, so for God's sake, cut them some slack. And with this mountain of disclaimers out of the way, let's get started. After the success of the Revolutionary War, President Thomas Jefferson purchased and acquired approximately 827,000 square miles west of the Mississippi River for $15 million, often referred to as the Louisiana Purchase. Colonists oversaw opportunities of an independent way of life and began moving west. But just when they felt they could move mountains, they began encountering one. Literally. They couldn't go over because they had horses and wagons that simply couldn't handle the rocky terrain, and they often couldn't go around for fears of encountering indigenous Americans. So that left two options: in, or the unthinkable, under. The average urban commuter wastes about 42 to 54 hours a year stuck in traffic jams, more than 2 days a year spent in traffic, and that's just the best case scenario. US highway congestion costs $160 billion a year due to lost productivity, gas burned, and additional wear and tear on vehicles. People these days, Americans especially, can't seem to agree on hardly anything, but one opinion we can all irrefutably share is that public transportation and transit infrastructure, especially in the US, bites. You either have to save money to buy the second most expensive household necessity behind a house, the car, spend an hour or two in traffic, or walk all the way down the people-infested sidewalks or stairs, cram yourself into a train, subway, or bus with complete and utter strangers, pretend that the constant stops are tolerable, and wait for thousands of other people who are closer to the door than you to get in and out first, in spite of the fact that you were here before them. And this all praying to God with every step you take that you aren't mugged. And somehow, in spite of all the rules you followed, you still came to work late. Some would even describe the situation as soul-destroying. But what if I were to tell you that there is a way out of this 8th level of hell? Take my hand, we're going to the tunnel, but not just any tunnel. Today we pass through the secret tunnel! No, not that one. I'm talking about the tunnel boring company known as the Boring Company. Original name, I know. Story goes, Elon was stuck in traffic one day and was so frustrated that he decided the only practical way to reduce congestion on roads is to reduce our dependence on roads. Or to put it more plainly, find a way to make traffic three-dimensional without the fear of screechingly loud flying cars flying on your head.
The inherent problem with the way cities are constructed is that you've got all these tall buildings that are in 3D and then a road network in 2D. And then everyone wants to go in and out of the 3D building at the same time. Necessarily, this will result in traffic. Unlike freeways or any kind of surface transit, it will not divide communities. You don't have to railroad through communities. You can just weave the boring system tunnel network into the fabric of a city without changing the character of the city. The city will still feel the same. You're not going to get in anyone's way. You're not going to obstruct anyone's view. You'll have this revolutionary transport system, and your city will still feel like your city.
And if traffic can become three-dimensional under the earth, there is no, I repeat, no limit to how many you can make.
But that's just adding more lanes, which have already proven unhelpful and expensive because now we need to pave more roads and we have to take the time to switch through even more lanes than we already have.
What this argument conveniently leaves out is the very obvious fact that the Boring Company is not only adding lanes, but in doing so underground, that frees up lanes on the surface. As Elon mentions,
one of the questions we're often asked is, well, sure, if you build this tunnel, then people will use it, and then it'll just get full, and then we'll be back to where we started, and it's like adding a lane on the freeway. You add the lane, but then the traffic expands to fully available volume. But the thing about going 3D is that you could have like 16 tunnels going in the same direction. So you can have as many tunnels as you want. And I'm pretty sure everyone in the United States is not going to move to LA. But you could literally build enough tunnels to transport everyone in the United States in LA. There is no limit. This is very important.
Meaning, the system can be improved and expanded indefinitely. Meanwhile, the subway still relies on the limited number of stations that we can actually feasibly build until we eventually run out, which explains one of the many reasons there are so little of them actually being used today. But we'll still hear skeptics question the validity of the Boring Company in spite of the fact that the same man who set out to create reusable f***ing rockets not only proved successful, but now reuses his regularly. Yeah, that same man has an idea for tunneling, and that's just too hard for him? Really? And people will defend the subway in spite of the fact that nobody uses or actually wants to use one. What these people will often tell you is that the Boring Company is a pipe dream because it doesn't actually solve traffic.
No shit, Sherlock.
Now, as long as we keep populating the Earth exponentially over time, you'll quickly rationalize that there is no real way to quote-unquote solve the traffic problem. So it's really a matter of how to make traffic less congested as possible. The real quote-unquote pipe dream is the hilarious notion that somehow people, Americans especially, will just freely give up their cars on a moment's whim in favor of more public transportation systems in place. And you could argue that the government could just do it anyway, regardless of what the masses think of it. Maybe. But enough people would be mad enough and there'd be enough riots in the streets that the government wouldn't even consider the idea, which explains where we stand today. I'm not even saying that I necessarily disagree with more public transportation, but the reality is that even if that would ultimately be a better thing, enough people like their cars enough that it would cause an outcry. It simply wouldn't make any sense for the government to shoot itself in the foot. I am sorry, but that is just never going to happen. Not in a million years. The only people I see religiously defending the public transit system, almost concerningly so in some cases,
oh, just take it easy, man,
are those who have never actually used it, or those who have used it but just so happen to live in the most ideal conditions from sheer luck, and take the assumption that that's how it must be for everyone else who uses the system. Or transit salesmen. Their so-called solution to solve traffic often relies on just keeping things the way they are and advocating for re-electing the same politicians whose ideas often possess the same broken promises they said they'd fix 18,000 elections ago. Yeah, wouldn't exactly put my faith in them.
But hey, I'm just not thinking this through, right?
Meanwhile, Elon has set out to do literally every single thing, including regularly reusing reusable f***ing rockets he has said he would do. Yes, he was a little late, but he still actually did it. Maybe I should just start thinking less about this, and maybe then I'll understand. Let me know in the comments if you think I should start thinking less. And these are the same people who say that Elon's tunneling idea neglects pedestrians who can't afford a car. Not really sure why people seem to think this, because he has also said in plain English that they will have continuously operating cars in the loop for those that do not have a car, giving priority to pedestrians and cyclists. With autonomous cars that are continuously circulating in the loop. Meaning, if you don't have a car, you can still use the system. I mean, for God's sake, if you just go to their website, you'll see plans to build tunnels just for pedestrians exclusively. So, not really sure why people lie their concerns there. And it's not just transportation he's talking.
We're also seeing a lot of interest in just utility tunnels, where a municipality could get a big tunnel and then put water mains and electricity lines inside the tunnel. If they have a water main break, instead of it flooding the main street in a city, they can actually go into the boring company tunnel and fix the water main. So it actually saves cities a lot of grief. And then just transport of like water and sewage and stuff. And we just dig holes in the ground.
They can even barely fit a standard size container in the freight tunnels. Imagine sucking in a giant container of goods traveling at speeds well over 100 miles an hour at a fraction of the cost it would traditionally be to transport. Basically like those suction tubes you would normally find from a science fiction movie. Faster than a plane, cheaper than a truck. And then we have metros, which are notorious for their delays and go on an extraordinarily amount over their budget right from the get-go, over and over and over again. So how is this method of boring tunnels more efficient than the subway? Well, I'll just let the Tesla space take it away from here.
The boring tunnels are just 12 feet in diameter, barely enough to fit a Tesla Model X SUV, so not 1 inch of space is wasted. The boring company also aims to run their drill with triple the amount of power than competitors thanks to electric motors instead of diesel-powered engines. And not only does the proof rock run stronger and leaner than the usual boring machine, it also runs smarter. The cutter on proof rock is modified to perform continuous dirt removal as it bores the tunnel, and then it is simultaneously reinforcing that tunnel with precast segments as it moves along. Traditionally, a tunneling machine would stop cutting every 5 feet to allow for reinforcement installation. The proof rock also operates in a way that the company compares to a porpoise, by which they mean the machine can launch from the bed of a truck, dig itself down into the earth, and then dig itself back to the surface at the end. Traditionally, you would dig a pit first, then lower the drilling machine down into that, and then at the end, you would need to dig another pit to get the machine back again, if it's recovered at all. Sometimes the machines will just dig their own graves into the side of the tunnel and stay underground forever because it's easier than getting them back out. And since every tunnel that the boring company drills is exactly the same diameter, these proof rock machines can be reused over and over again. And since they are electric, they require much less maintenance work and refurbishing compared to the usual drilling machines. The company will pay a quarterly franchise fee to the city of Las Vegas in exchange for the use of their land or underland. I don't know the technicalities there. This is a really unique way to approach public transit. Usually, the city government would pay a company a large sum of money to build them a transit system, and then the city would recoup the expenses by taking over fare collection. This boring company deal is the opposite, and it makes a lot of sense. By putting the financial burden and payoff on the builder/operator, it really incentivizes them to provide and maintain a high quality product that stays profitable in the long term. This sounds like a win-win scenario.
And keep in mind, Elon essentially describes getting to make anything in LA regulatory hell. And they started there. So as Elon says,
LA is like the tunnel equivalent of Broadway. We've got earthquakes, we've got oil and gas and methane in the soil. You can still drill oil in LA. You've got sort of sandy, rocky soil. There's about 1 million regulatory agencies that you have to satisfy. If you can tunnel here, you can tunnel anywhere.
So normally tunnels cost up to $1 billion, so a highly discounted tunnel would be $200 million. The boring company's first tunnels cost around $10 million. Instead of spending $1 billion per mile in 10 years, the company aims to do so for $10 million per mile in under 1 year. I'm gonna say that again. The boring company is promising costs below $10 million per mile, which is so significantly lower than the competition that it can't even be compared. The company has also been able to achieve a tunnel boring speed of 1 mile per week. This is a crazy decrease of the typical 1 mile per 10 weeks. Oh, and don't forget, the average speed on the subway is a little over 10 miles per hour with frequent stops. But as many point out, you can go faster in your car than you can the subway. Wow. Like, way faster. The main arteries of what Elon refers to as the loop are expected to be 150 miles per hour with little to no stops. The subway station is starting to look pretty old right about now. Not to mention, instead of congesting traffic further with individual humans who have to get on and off a subway station one by one with only one station from point A to the other at point B, because Teslas and the Boring Company's pod-like buses can take less people per vehicle now, freeing up the space a traditional subway carriage would have taken up practically tenfold. And because tunneling makes traffic three-dimensional, they can now add basically infinite number of stations all over the city. People can now freely hop on and off a Boring Company vehicle without waiting for countless amounts of people to get on or off the subway who are in your way. Oh yeah, did I mention it's going to take a whole lot longer to load or unload a traditional bus, subway, carriage, or train than it is to load or unload a 4-passenger car? Because a 4-passenger car has 4 doors, one per each person, whereas the traditional bus, subway, carriage, or train typically has 1 or 2 doors on it, often way further away than like 90% of the people in it are. Yeah, I think you could figure out what makes more sense from there. Something that I often see Boring Company haters bring up is concerns for safety, and well, I'll just let my Tesla weekend take it from here.
Cool your heels with the building a transit tunnel at 70% off. The Boring Company is a complete bomb. Its tunnels are pathetic shadows of a real workable transit tunnel with all the safety infrastructure required. Its tunneling speed is astronomically slower than state-of-the-art tunneling machines. Look at the time to build the pathetic few miles of the Vegas Loop. No amount of LED fairy lights can obscure the fact that the Boring Company is as big a bust as the Hyperloop. So yeah, I went ahead and wrote a detailed reply. So let's look at these complaints. I said they are cheaper because the diameter is 70% smaller or more. They are only 4 inches larger than what they use in the London tubes for the London Underground. The diameter of the Boring Tunnel was chosen on purpose. It's not just 11 feet bigger across, it's the cross section itself that's massively bigger. The London Tube, 11 foot 8 versus the Boring Tunnel at 12 feet. To date, Elon Musk-owned company has focused on building tunnels to transport passengers, although moving freight could be a thing. Why make something smaller? Why make it less safe? Also, the speed complaint is woefully off base. The tunnel in Seattle cost $3.4 billion. It's only about 3 miles long. Yeah, 5.5 years to go 2 miles at a cost of over $3 billion. Vegas Loop was a pair of 1-mile tunnels completed in a year and a half for $55 million, an average speed of 49 feet per day. And that was during the pandemic. That was during the lockdown. At worst, the Boring Tunnel in Vegas was 30 times cheaper and 3 times faster. And it's already expanded to the Strip. Here it is in front of Resorts World. They're working on the station inside. This is a very cheap system. So what are the potential points of failure? You know, we've got to have all that safety stuff, right? The safety factor's misunderstood. Tunnels have a bunch of escape routes because tunnels, as they exist today, need them. They're dangerous places to be, full of fumes, or in the case of subways, a third rail, which will absolutely fry you. And even if you didn't have that, when you get out of the car, where do you go? Do you go into traffic to get hit? Is traffic bi-directional? In some tunnels it is. So they either have petrol fumes from a mess of unpredictable vehicles or high voltage lines to zap you. So what are the potential points of failure in a tunnel like the Boring Tunnel? If a vehicle simply dies, there's inconvenience, but nothing catastrophic or deadly. The failure is unlikely since there's no opportunity for road debris and maintenance is easy and predictable. If one were to somehow crash into the wall or another vehicle, it's not going to result in a fire. There's no gasoline to burn and there's no exhaust. There's no third rail or overhead high voltage lines to electrocute you. And electric cars, even the Chevy Bolt, do not simply spontaneously combust. Even those go up en fuego while charging. So in short, there are no escape wells because there's no need for them. That's why the design was approved in the first place. Oh, the tunnels are a death trap. Getting a tunnel approved, getting any sort of infrastructure approved, getting any sort of transit system approved is a monumental undertaking, and I assure you, it's been considered. In the event an evacuation was needed, you get out and you walk along the tunnel. Since it's a single-file tunnel, nobody's coming from that direction, only traffic behind you. If someone's coming from ahead of you, that's a rescue crew. So while Teslas presently used in the tunnels are not ideally suited for the application, they need to be trains. You know, what you've invented is trains but worse. So the Boring Tunnel already meets the project requirements, as is, in terms of cost and capacity. By comparison, a current project underway, designed to expand the Los Angeles metro system by 9 miles, costs over above $1 billion. $1 billion a mile. That's That's insane. So let's look at the cross-section again. Diameter of 12 feet gives you an area of 113. And here's the little guy. And by the way, they do have proposals for bigger ones that would be wide enough to hold 2 shipping containers on a specialized skateboard. But the boring tunnel is very small compared to Seattle's tunnel, 57 feet across. Now look at that though. Isn't that pretty? 2 lanes of traffic, separated, all kinds of access and pipes and utility stuff. It's great, but it's big and it's expensive. And that's because its cross-section is 2,463 feet. It's 2,000% bigger cross-section. 2,000%. That's outrageous. So why not just do trains? Trains already exist. They're already better. So the boring tunnel, the Vegas loop cost about $55 million. The next closest bid was $215 million for an elevated rail system. There's no budget, man. The alternative to the Vegas loop was not an above-ground rail system. It was no system. 4 times cheaper. 4 times cheaper. And this is something, as we can see, that is now able to expand.
Well, if we're eventually going to be more overpopulated and end up with more densely populated cities, then what if we just fund more public transit instead?
You get that the entire selling point of the Boring Company is to never have to leave your car in spite of overpopulation, right? An advantage that subways, trains, and even buses obviously will never have. Which means even though we eventually become a densely populated species, we now no longer have to sacrifice a higher quality of life. Do people forget you still have to walk to trains, buses, and subways? Even if it's at a shorter distance for most, the people who aren't so lucky sometimes have to walk miles depending on the place they live. Something else that people forget to mention is that trains need to accommodate massive amounts of people despite the fact that very few people actually get on or off a train at any given station, in most circumstances at least. Now the loop will take people from A to B directly and eventually almost instantly. The system will use vehicles that only hold a maximum of 8 to 16 people at a time, which means that the vehicles can be smaller than subway carriages. In fact, they'll only be as small as a car. So much so that the actual diameter of the tunnel itself doesn't need to be as big either. In fact, this means that instead of a standard 28 feet for a 1-lane tunnel, these could be reduced to less than 14 feet in diameter. Now, this means that the actual costs for the digging and construction of tunnels could be reduced by as much as 4 times.
4 times cheaper.
Never mind that because they're smaller, you can now bore more tunnels faster.
But wait, there's more!
They also made the fastest boring machine in the world, which is actually slower than a snail. But they're going to make new machines and a new system that'll be able to beat the snail pace. And they even have a company mascot named Gary the Snail, who lives in a pineapple to keep them on track.
This is our snail. This is Gary the Sixth. Yeah. It turns out snails don't live that long, so this is Gary the Sixth. This is our goal. We must be faster than a snail.
So how are they going to build the system? One of Elon's lesser-known companies, Tesla, builds some of the best batteries for EVs. That being said, you would traditionally need a hyper-long power cord to power the boring drill to make it go faster and run more efficiently down a tunnel, exponentially needing more and more wire until you eventually either don't have a long enough cable anymore or need to buy more power extension cords. Since Tesla is already so great at making batteries that you can take with you, this is an advantage that other subway systems can only dream of having. Not to mention, not needing as much of a ventilation shaft because instead of the traditional diesel-powered muck carts, which vomited obnoxious fumes in your face, the Boring Company essentially uses tiny electric trains instead. Not to mention the boring machine itself solidifying the walls of the tunnel as you take dirt out simultaneously. Now I want you to imagine drilling 2 tunnels right next to each other with 2 boring machines. You could get things delivered in one lane and get things out with the other as it solidifies the tunnel simultaneously.
But I'm not done yet!
They then use the dirt that they just dug up from said tunnel and compress it really hard into bricks, which they can sell for only, wait for it, 10 cents, which is one of, if not the cheapest bricks you can buy, making it practically impossible for the other brick manufacturers to compete. They can actually take a higher compressive strength than concrete, not to mention its smoothness. They're basically giant-sized Lego kits for adults to use in construction. And due to its cheaper price, those bricks can help more affordable houses for those who otherwise couldn't afford one. Over time, of course. 15 to 20% of the cost of tunnels used to be just from removing the muck, which traditionally was discarded and not even used, or worse, brought back in. This changes that. And it even lines up with Tesla's mission statement to accelerate the world's transition to sustainable energy, because bricks are cheaper, better for the environment, and help them gain profits to grow their company from literal dirt. Enough said. So let's take a look at how the subway is holding up. Oh yeah, that's right, upkeep. Are we seriously gonna sit here and act like we should expect the train and subway carriages to never break down? It would be much easier and much quicker, maybe even actually cheaper in the event a Boring Company skate breaks down than an entire 4,000-ton train. And keep in mind, there'd be an abundance of backups readily available at a moment's notice. Can't really say the same for a train. And this is assuming they even break down at all. Knowing Elon, we'll probably get to the point where you'll be more likely to get struck by lightning than have this happen. Not to mention, the elevators are described as very easy to install essentially anywhere you want, meaning you could literally have one installed basically right underneath your garage and have it connect to a loop wherever you need to go.
When you ride the tunnel, you'll see the entrance that's basically in the backyard of a house. When the boring machine broke through the other side, the neighbor did not even stop watching TV. That's how subtle it was. So you will not hear, see, or feel the tunnels being created.
Oh, and as a bonus, the elevator itself only takes up as much as 2 parking spaces on the street.
But now you'll have traffic wanting to use one of these stations.
As mentioned before, once you make traffic 3-dimensional, there is no, I emphasize, no limit to how many of these elevators can go into the ground. If there's several million of these elevators lying around in just the US alone, then yeah, I'm willing to bet you're bound to find one nearby without traffic or wait times. And I didn't even mention if Tesla eventually has their way, and if every Tesla car was now equipped with full self-driving and every car was a robo-taxi, then what exactly would even be the use of making parking lots anymore? The only reason we would need them is for a car to remain stationary, but if the robo-taxis are constantly driving us around all by themselves, then other than recharging themselves, when exactly would they ever stop to park? Never mind saving stupid amounts of money every year on parking infrastructure. Elon has stated from the beginning that in the long run, the plan is to have this system work without human drivers, which means you will have a far less likely probability of dying in a car crash. Because let's face it, driving was never and will never be one of our strong suits. And if there's no accidents, then what exactly could even cause traffic? Oh, and as a bonus, they've also said they're committed to opening the tunnels for non-Tesla EVs as well, as long as it's equipped with full self-driving. Did I mention this was all privately funded, which means it isn't paid for by your tax dollars? Which means this is all being paid for by and for the Boring Company. It's almost like this is a self-sustaining company. Wonder where they get an idea like that from. Self-funded only from the dirt bricks and riders paying a fee. The price of which, from what I know at least, is very dependent on where you live and where these tunnels are built. Kind of like the subway actually. For example, in Chicago, between O'Hare International Airport and the city's central business district at least, how much a ride will cost is subject to final negotiations, but Boring has stated a goal of charging between $20 and $25 or half the cost of a typical rideshare or cab ride to O'Hare. In some places, it's even free to use. I didn't even mention the possibility to use these boring machines to eventually terraform other planets. And the cherry on the cake that many people often don't even factor into this is full self-driving might accidentally solve traffic before the Boring Company can above ground, because as stated before, no accidents equals no traffic. And for those of you who still fear this won't work out and be a huge waste of money that could have been put somewhere else, ask yourself this simple question. Even if you're right, and even if that does happen, we will then course correct and determine that this just won't work. Because at the end of the day, in the event that happens, why on earth would Musk continually put his own money into harm's way and at the same time not make any substantial change in the world while doing so?
You know, one thing I should...
Sounds to me like it wouldn't exactly be in his best interest. They would then pour that money into other, somewhat proven ideas that could help people solve traffic. So either they succeed or learn that they can't and conclude that financially supporting this project no longer makes sense, ensuring that we don't ever waste our money on this idea again. So either way, it's money well spent. And while we're on the topic of wasting money, you can't deny that the other options are a whole lot different. What's paradoxically ironic is that these same people will often theorize that Elon made the Boring Company as a get-rich-quick scheme, in spite of the fact that he lost money on a regular basis from this idea. If he wanted to get rich quick, then please enlighten me why on earth he would make his first demo example in LA at a loss completely free to the public. And then there's the fears of weather conditions, most commonly citing, you guessed it, the very first tunnel in LA as the prime example. Just one question. When does Vegas ever get hurricanes, or even rain, for that matter? Now, I'm no expert, but it doesn't take one to recognize that things are obviously built to local standards and considerations. No two boring tunnel systems are alike. Also, it's literally called a closed-loop system for a reason. And sure, even if water does somehow get in, drains are a thing that exists. Hell, there's even tunnels made underwater.
But what about earthquakes?
When designed properly, tunnels are actually some of the safest places to be during an earthquake. From a structural safety standpoint, the tunnel moves uniformly with the ground in contrast to how surface structures react to earthquakes. But hey, I'm sure this multi-million-dollar company whose very existence relies heavily on making sure the system works properly didn't take that into consideration. Right? Oh, sorry, I'm doing that thinking thing again. So to all you doubters out there who say that this system still isn't as good as the alternatives, people aren't impressed with the Boring Company because it does the same things trains already do. People are impressed with it because it even works at all. There may have been other ideas like it in the past, none of which I could find with autonomous cars driving in underground tunnels that scale profitably, but we've never actually seen them work for a fraction of the price of the alternatives. The fact that this system even works at all is absolutely outstanding. In a nutshell, the Transit Defender is the just buy a gaming PC guy of the transportation world. He conveniently forgets to mention that obviously the gameplay will be enhanced if you shell out your kidney for an RTX, but doesn't mention its clunky, hard-to-navigate UI, its lack of comfortable portability, and finally, not everyone uses a computer for gaming. Most use it for what it was meant to be used for: getting to work portably. Now, could you do the same thing on a gaming PC? Technically, sure. But that doesn't mean you should. Given the choice between working on a gaming PC or a Mac, 10 times out of 10, you're going to pick the Mac. Now, could you do the same on PC? Technically, yes. But that doesn't ultimately make it a better experience for your use case, hence why we still have both for different markets. And I think we'll see the same thing for tunneling, even if the other system only serves under very oddly specific circumstances. Imagine creating a time machine, but someone complains that you could only travel 10 minutes into the future or 10 minutes into the past, so that makes it useless. It's like, dude, it's a fucking time machine. Who cares? The fact that it even works at all is something to commemorate. Bottom line, if we can keep our personal freedom and save money on our infrastructure in doing so, then, quite frankly, why the hell not? Who exactly is being taken advantage of in this scenario? It isn't the government who saves hundreds of millions of dollars every year. It definitely isn't the pedestrians who get to keep their personal freedom of transportation. And it sure as hell isn't the Boring Company who can make a profit from it. I ask again, who exactly loses in this scenario? Now, conversely, I ask another question. Who exactly is benefiting from the alternative system? It isn't the pedestrians who often have to walk and pay for expensive transit, which is put there so that they don't have to walk to it in the first place. It isn't the government who has to spend billions of dollars on it. And it isn't the transit companies that have to abide under the foot of government regulations. I swear, people make arguments up from thin air for this company. One being that we can't tunnel because of the deep underground foundations that we build our infrastructure on, often in densely populated areas. Guess what I'm about to say? Just guess. If you make traffic three-dimensional, there is no, I overemphasize, no limit to how deep you can go. There's this thing called digging. And if there's still foundations in the way, there's this thing called digging more. Also, they could easily just tunnel under roads, eliminating the concerns from foundations. We can easily work around this, contrary to popular belief. And yes, if you conversely have uncongested areas with a more spread out population, you'll often have to encounter property rights. This is true. However, it's not like Elon hasn't done this before. He's a negotiator. It's what he does. And even if he can't, he can just keep hopping to places until someone else eventually gives the go-ahead. Also, if these tunnels can just follow the routes of existing freeways, then won't this basically eliminate any lawsuits from citizens? Why exactly wouldn't they be okay with more forms of transportation if it frees up traffic? I love how if this was a subway, everyone wouldn't question where you could build one, but since the Boring Company has a Boring Company logo on it, that all of a sudden means we can't make tunnels underground because of the foundations in spite of the fact that subways have already been built underground. Oh, shut up! You gotta love them double standards. And last but not least, I cannot believe I even have to explain why this thesis is hollow. No pun intended. But there are actual humans on this platform who genuinely believe that sharp corners at high speeds in a tunnel even come close to comparing to the open highway. Let me explain something to you. When you travel at 100 miles an hour on the highway and make a sharp turn, what's gonna happen? You'll flip your car over. When you travel at 100 miles an hour in the concealed tunnel and make a sharp turn, what do you think will happen? You won't flip your car over because you literally can't, because quite frankly, where where exactly is your car going to go? Really bad scratches on the sides at worst, but that's about it. Not even mentioning their eventual end goal of retractable wheels that can be fitted to any autonomous electric car for a cost of $200 to $300, preventing the scratches on the sides. Also, people seem to forget that EVs have extremely heavy batteries that weigh the car down to the ground, making them almost completely flip-proof, drastically improving the handling. Perfect for a tunnel. Teslas won't need rails to keep the car glued to the floor because the batteries basically already do that anyway.
Well, doesn't that make tires wear down quicker?
Yes, it does. However, Tesla has been rumored to really want some of Goodyear's airless tires, which would almost completely eliminate the concerns of tire wear. And I know, that's just speculation on my end, but you gotta admit, it might explain why Tesla is rumored to want them in the first place. And yeah, I know, they're still not on par with traditional air tires, but it's not like technological advances are a thing proven to fix technological shortcomings. Oh wait, they are. Need I remind you of the reusable well, you get the point now. And all of this without even mentioning the Hyperloop, but that is a topic for another day. Thank you all for watching. I love every single one of you, and have a great day.
I think that finally, there's something that I think could solve the goddamn traffic problem.